Behind these walls, my heart found you.
The first time Officer Maya Reeves pressed her hand against the cold, steel door of Block C and felt it shudder under the weight of everything she was trying to keep. Locked inside herself, she knew something had already changed. She had spent 4 years in this prison telling herself that duty was enough, that the uniform was armor, that the keys on her hip were a kind of power, that the distance between her and the women on the other side of those bars was necessary, professional, and permanent. Then inmate 4471 arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, with bruises on her wrists from the transport cuffs and eyes that held no fear whatsoever, and Maya understood for the first time what it felt like to be the one behind bars. Her name was Selena Voss, and she had been sentenced to 6 years for a crime that her public defender had called circumstantial, and the prosecutor had called clear-cut. She carried herself through the intake process with a stillness that unsettled the other officers. Most new inmates came in either crying or performing toughness. Selena came in like someone who had already made peace with losing everything. She signed the paperwork without reading it. She changed into the gray uniform without flinching. She looked at the cell that would become her world with the same expression someone might wear while looking at a familiar painting. Not happy, not devastated, just present. Maya watched all of this from across the processing room, clipboard in hand, and told herself she was just doing her job. The first weeks were unremarkable on the surface. Maya ran Block C the way she always had. Firm, fair, and emotionally unavailable. She enforced the rules, because rules were the only thing holding the chaos of that place together. She had grown up understanding that love was a luxury that got people hurt, a lesson her own mother had taught her without meaning to, and she had carried that belief through every relationship she had ever tried and failed to sustain. The prison, in some strange way, made sense to her. Everything had a structure. Everyone knew their place. There was a terrible comfort in that, but Selena kept slipping past her defenses without even trying. It started with books. The prison library was a sad collection of water-damaged paperbacks and outdated encyclopedias, and Selena was working her way through all of them with a devotion that Maya found herself watching from the doorway during her rounds. One afternoon, when the library was otherwise empty, Selena had looked up from a novel and said something about the ending being dishonest. That real heartbreak never resolved itself as neatly as fiction pretended, and Maya had stopped walking and stood there for too long before remembering that she was supposed to keep moving. That night, lying in her apartment 20 minutes from the facility, Maya stared at the ceiling and thought about the way Selena's voice sounded when she talked about something she believed in, low and certain and entirely unbothered by whether anyone agreed with her. Maya began finding reasons to linger. She would adjust the schedule so that her rounds passed through the library during the hour she knew Selena spent there. She told herself it was professional attention, the kind of heightened awareness a good officer maintained around inmates who were still being assessed. She was very good at lying to herself. It was a skill she had refined over years of looking at her own reflection and saying everything is fine when everything was not fine. When the loneliness had grown so heavy that some nights it felt like a physical pressure on her chest. She had never told anyone in her professional life that she was gay. The environment did not invite that particular honesty. She had learned to keep that part of herself folded, away like a letter she had written and never sent. The thing that broke something open between them happened during a night shift in March, when a violent altercation in another block sent the facility into a lockdown that lasted 4 hours. Maya was stationed at the end of Block C's corridor, and Selena's cell was the last one on the left. The other inmates were tense and loud, banging against their bars and shouting things into the dark. Selena sat on her bunk with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes closed, and she was very quietly humming something that Maya could not identify, but that sounded like a lullaby. In the middle of all that institutional noise and fear, that small sound was so unexpectedly human that Maya felt something crack behind her sternum. She stood near the bars and listened without speaking, and Selena, without opening her eyes, said she used to sing her younger sister to sleep when there was no one else to do it, and that sometimes the body remembered what the mind was trying to forget. Maya did not say anything in response. But she did not walk away either. After that night, the silence between them became a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of strangers or of authority and submission. It was the silence of two people who recognized something in each other that had no safe language yet. Selena started leaving small drawings tucked in the book she returned to the library. Not addressed to anyone, just left there geometric patterns and small birds and occasionally a phrase from something she had read. Maya started reading them the way she would read private correspondence, carefully and privately, folding them and putting them in her jacket, pocket and standing in the parking lot after her shift feeling something that terrified her entirely. She knew what was happening. She knew it the way you know a storm is coming when the air changes quality before a single cloud appears on the horizon. She knew it was impossible and dangerous and that the power imbalance alone made it something she should shut down immediately. She was the officer. Selena was the inmate. The rules were not abstract. They were there to protect both of them. And breaking them could cost Maya her career, her freedom, and potentially make things catastrophically worse for Selena. Maya went home one night and sat at her kitchen table for a very long time thinking about all of this with the kind of brutal clarity that only the most inconvenient truths seem to produce. And yet the heart, when it finally decides to feel something after years of enforced numbness, is not particularly interested in what is convenient. Maya did not act on anything. She was careful in ways that cost her sleep. She maintained her professional distance even as her internal world was reorganizing itself entirely around the fact of this woman who sat in a gray cell, reading damaged paperbacks and humming lullabies in the dark. She told herself that caring for someone's well-being from a distance was not the same as crossing a line. She made sure Selena was protected from the inmates who had started to single her out. She ensured she had access to better reading materials. She did all of this quietly, invisibly within the technical limits of her role. Selena, for her part, seemed to understand the shape of the thing without needing it named. She was perceptive in a way that reminded Maya of people who had survived difficult childhoods by learning to read rooms before entering them. She never pushed. She never tested the boundary or tried to manufacture moments. She simply existed fully and without pretense in whatever space she was given, and in doing so she made it impossible for Maya to go on pretending that existing fully was something she herself was doing. The crisis came in month 5. Another officer noticed the way Maya moved through Block C and made a comment in the break room that was casual enough to be deniable but pointed enough to be a warning. Maya understood that the gossip infrastructure of a correctional facility was sophisticated and merciless, and that her career, which was the only stable thing she had built for herself in her adult life, was in genuine jeopardy. She went to Selena's cell that evening during a quiet hour and stood at the bars and told her, in professional language that said almost nothing of what she meant, that she needed to be more consistent in her rounds, that she could not be seen to give special attention to any single inmate. Selena looked at her for a long moment and then nodded, once with an expression that told Maya she understood everything that had just been said beneath the words that had actually been spoken. It was the most honest conversation they had ever had. Maya transferred to a different block 3 days later, citing administrative reasons. She put in the paperwork herself and pushed it through before she could change her mind. The morning she walked out of Block C for the last time, Selena was sitting in the common area with a book open in her lap. She did not look up. Maya did not stop walking, but in the space between them, across the institutional floor with its worn linoleum and its fluorescent hum and its air of contained grief, something passed that had no name and needed none. In the months that followed, Maya began therapy for the first time in her life. She started telling the truth about herself, first to her therapist, then slowly to a friend, then to her sister, who cried and said she had known for years and had simply been waiting. Maya began to understand that the love she had felt in that prison, however impossible and unacted upon, had not been a mistake. It had been the first time in years that she had felt the full weight of herself pressing against the world, and that feeling, however painful, was the opposite of emptiness. She stopped being afraid of her own interior life. She started to learn what it felt like to be known. Selena was released 14 months early for good behavior, on a cold morning in November that Maya knew nothing about. She was in a different building by then, working a different block, slowly becoming a different version of herself. She did not know where Selena went when those doors opened. She did not know if Selena ever thought about the officer who stood too long in library doorways or whether those folded drawings meant anything to anyone but her. What she knew was that something had happened behind those walls that had quietly saved her life, and she carried it forward with the same care that Selena had carried her lullaby, quietly, in the middle of everything loud, because some things are too real to say out loud and too important to ever stop. If this story moves something in you, if you recognized in Maya or Selena any piece of what it means to love in silence, to survive behind the walls we build inside ourselves, or to be changed by someone you were never supposed to get close to, then this video was made for you. Please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear that love finds people in the most impossible places, and subscribe so these stories can keep reaching hearts that need them. You being here means more than you know. Before this story closes, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever loved someone from a distance, carrying it quietly because the world left no room for it to be spoken? Your words might be exactly what a stranger reading the comments needs to feel less alone tonight. And this is where we leave Maya. Not with a perfect ending, not with the kind of resolution that fiction usually offers, but with something more honest and more durable than that. She is standing in a parking lot after her shift and the air is cold, and somewhere across the city a woman who hummed lullabies in the dark is breathing free air for the first time in years. Maya tilts her face up toward a sky that is gone the particular shade of purple that only happens just after the light leaves, and she feels, for the first time in a very long time, that she is exactly where she is supposed to be, broken open, more herself than she has ever been, and finally, no longer alone inside her own life.